Okay, sorry about the weird angle of this video, but I just want to show a few tweaks I've made to my little heat mapping project, and using a mixture of software on the old Android. As I stated, it's got the RTL-BLOG v3 good old plugged in there, and oh, we don't want watchmaker just yet. That's for a future project, to get something on the old smartwatch, which I've already sort of done. However, this is KLWP live wallpaper. I'm using Tasker to automate a few things to run inside a chroot. Yeah, Android is rooted, and it's got a Debian chroot via LinuxDeploy in here, which allows me to access the dongle through libUSB. I've explained it before. I have done a few rundowns of how I set it up and whatnot. If you search the RTL SDR subreddit on Reddit, you'll come across some of my posts. But what the initial one was I made is basically it would just run a scan between a 10 megahertz band range and just find the strongest signal within that 10 megahertz, and then if it's above a certain SNR, it will then log the GPS, store it to a file, and then I can create a pretty little heat map as I wander around. But what I was more interested in is actually finding a signal and then looking at it to determine what it is. So the idea is eventually to incorporate one of the other projects that are available either on GitHub or somewhere, like Artemis or similar, that uses SIG-ID wiki to determine what kind of signal it is. So I'll stop babbling now and give you an example. I'll go for a frequency range where I know stuff is. I could either use the airwave or I could use I'll go 450. It'll automatically choose 10 megahertz higher. I just okay that. You can ignore these graphs at the side here. That was from a previous scan, and they will update when this comes. Use a GNUPlot as well, so it runs RTL power FFTW. Generating heat map. And then passes that data on to GNUPlot to then create this graph here, which is then sent through Tasker back to KLWP. Now it's found 450.5 megahertz, which is very weak. But what it will now do, once it's locked onto the strongest signal, it will then use the original RTL power and heat map Python script to then do this, and it's basically doing an iteration every second. And there's a small bash script that's doing a little loop every 5 or 10 seconds to print it to KLWP. So as you can see here, I'm starting to see Gordon Bennett, the exposure on this is really crap. But yeah, there we go. You sort of get the idea there. 450.5, which seems to be that little yellow band there, but in the middle there is a tetra signal, which I know what that is. That's a HMP Winchester. It's quite weak where I am. Oh god, I've lost focus as well. It's quite weak where I am. Well, rather in the position that the phone's in, because it's only a little homemade stubby 6-foot electrically short antenna, so it's not really optimized. That will go on for, well, that was me doing an RTL power. That will go on for approximately 5 minutes, so that I can get an idea of everything that's happening. And the idea is, obviously I'm not going to keep it going for as long as this. I'd only need a very small sample, crop it even further, and then pass that signal onto some database to see if it can be identified. What I'll do is I'll pause this video and I'll show you another little trick that it can do using that little graph that was seen before. Is that I saw someone ask, I think it was last night on Reddit, whether or not it was possible to use an old analog scanner as a bug finder, one of these hidden bugs so you can hear things. And then come to my conclusion, well, most of them, even the cheap ones you can get these days, are 2.4 gigahertz, or you can even get ones that connect to the mobile network. And they're thinking, while the RTL-BLOG can't got past 1.7 gigs, it can still find some of the older ones that may be operating on 49 megahertz, or maybe even using the PMR bands, or 4, 3, is it 3.9 megahertz, the SRD bands, or even 866 megahertz. And I thought, well, hold on a minute, I can use RTL Power FFTW to do a wideband scan with no gain, or rather 001 on gain, and it will only then spike on the map of the strongest signal. So obviously you stand next to a source where you suspect a signal is being transmitted from, and you do a wideband scan. And I'll pause this video, wait until this is finished, and I'll come back and I'll show you that one. Okay, so that's it done. I know I should add a method to actually stop that, but there's a script running a script that then backgrounds to, yeah, it's a... Right, so we go back to GNUPlot, and as I had up earlier, you saw all this. Now, last night I ran 100 megahertz to 1 gigahertz at 001 gain, if you can. Now, I'm obviously passing that off into, because it's the same script I'm using from Tasker to call. So I basically then run this, and it will then, excuse me, Jesus. There we go. It will now start scanning from 100 megahertz into megahertz block sizes for approximately half a second, and then very quickly move on. Now it does take about a minute or so to do it, but it does give you an idea that it can be done. And obviously you can use multiple SDRs in order to shorten the scan windows of each one, just in case, you know, a transmitter only transmits in small pulses. I mean, if I was to build a bug, I wouldn't have it transmitting continuously. I'd have it, you know, store what is said into a small buffer, compress it as much as humanly possible, well, as much as technically possible, and then, you know, short burst it over a digitally encoded signal, so it's not always transmitting. It'll only transmit in short bursts and pulses. It could potentially defeat a scan like this. But obviously if you've got multiple SDRs doing wider band scanning, it'll become harder. Now, I do suspect it will pick out one or two signals. It'll be pretty much a flat noise floor, but it will probably have one or two spikes. We're at 400 megahertz at the moment, or just under 400 megahertz. There we go. Yeah, I mean, so this is actually quite interesting. This is I am going to go test this in some places. I'm probably going to take it to work and just stand next to the control office. Sometimes that guy, when he's doing his radio check-ins, he likes to blabber on a little bit. But I mean, for an old school bug, so you know, 49 megahertz one, for example, that are analog, they're going to be transmitting continuously. So even with a very low gain, if you're stood very close to the source of the signal, it's definitely going to show up. It will be an obvious spike out of the flat line. Well, it's not going to be a flat line. It's going to be just like this really thick, jaggedy line across the bottom, and maybe one or two slightly elevated spikes. I mean, obviously if the signal is strong, then it would be. And this is also as well, for some people, is a very, very ineffective way of testing the bleed out of a radio. Ideally, you'd want to be in a Faraday environment so you don't escape, you know, so you don't cause interference. Or, for example, if you're making a QSO with someone, I got my partner to stand about 100 meters away from me, line of sight, as I was talking to someone on a repeater. And, you know, I got it to scan very quickly, jump from its key frequency to the first harmonic to the second harmonic, and just very rapidly all scan all three of those bands, and you could get a rough idea if your radio was leaking harmonics. And surprisingly, it wasn't as effective as what I thought, but it did show one of my barrel fangs on the first harmonic was quite a noticeable little spike, and that was at 100 meters away. Where are we at now? Oh, 934. 950. Yeah, there we go. A few more seconds to go. Okay, maybe more than a few. Nearly there. So yeah, that's only 100. So it's only a 900 megahertz scan I just did there. And ta-da! Now that that's done, I should now have. Oh dear, hold on, let's tap that. There we go. As I said, there's a couple of spikes here. Ignore that. It's too much data for that to be processed at the moment. I need to find a way of making it efficient. But as you can see at the top there is a spike around about 400 megahertz. So there's a couple of spikes just past 100, a couple around 200, and some near 300. Now I can tell you that spike there just below 400 megahertz is the UK airwave system. It's extremely strong signal where I am. There seems to be quite a few transmitters here in Winchester. So yeah, that's that. There you go. There's your little bug detector. Is that we can tell that there are some very, very strong signals very near me here, and they're all 400 megahertz and below. So there we go. Bug Finder 2. Enjoy.